Hello, my name is Josephine Baird. I'm a lecturer at Uppsala University Department of Game Design, and this is a lecture on research through design. So what is it and why use it? Well, research through design is an established research method to look at game design and its features. It can be used to determine what outcomes result from designs assembled and constructed along specific theoretical frames. And it itself can be part of an iterative process, which can lead to a number of outcomes, including knowledge creation, theoretical validation, or further design outcomes. There are roughly three key approaches to game design research, which research through design is one of. It's useful to consider the other ones, in part to realize what research through design is in comparison to those, but also that research through design is often based on the other two. So, to introduce, research through design or research of design can happen through research of the design. This is specifically the study, usually of established game designs, in order to determine their function and characteristics. Several methodologies can be applied to this approach, depending on what is being examined and through which theoretical lens. So, for example, a close reading methodology may look at how particular features of game function in relation to others. It can even reference cultural, thematic aspects. It can talk about mechanics. There are all kinds of ways in which to do that kind of research of design. Of course, other approaches could involve playtesting and player experience, or any number of other methodologies. The outcome of these kinds of research projects is usually in the form of study results and theoretical analysis, which means that the results are analyzed and conclusions are drawn on key themes or key elements that are common to specific game designs or to the game that's being studied at that time. Research for design, in comparison, is the study of game design principles specifically for the purpose of aiding further or future design. So this can be considered a precursor to research through design, in which case research of design is also a precursor to research through design. Let me explain. Research for design is research that considers what design principles could be implemented to lead to certain effects. So considering, perhaps based on the research of design that you've done, you can then consider what kind of processes might be useful for designers in the future. Several methodologies here can also be applied, but these must match with the goal of creating knowledge which is useful for future design work specifically. So that limits the methodologies and can be a little bit less broad than, for example, the research of design. And then research through design. This is research conducted specifically through the act of designing. As such, methodologies may be more limited than the previous two approaches and will have to be concomitant with the design approach and the theoretical framework that's being used. The theoretical framework, therefore, must be carefully considered prior to the engagement with research through design and can often be established through research of design or research for design. The theoretical framework, therefore, forms the basis of the design principle and approach, and a game design is instigated on these principles. And as such, the subject of study then becomes how the resultant game puts into practice the theoretical principles upon which it is based. This can then be tested in a number of ways, depending on the nature of the game and the theoretical principles being examined. So you're taking an idea, the idea of how a game could lead to a certain effect, the research for design, which has been based perhaps on research of other games. These kinds of games have led to this kind of impact. We draw conclusions that perhaps these kinds of design principles would lead to that kind of effect. You are then going to design a game based on those theoretical principles to see if that is in fact the case. And that can be tested in a number of ways, depending on what it is exactly that you're trying to test in terms of the theoretical framework, and of course, how the game you've created functions in itself. When you're testing of research through design, this is going to be then highly dependent, as I mentioned, on the theoretical principles being examined. Depending on the goals of the research project, game functionality, player experience, the assemblage of the game as a whole, and more can be examined. If you're interested in the assemblage of game, you can look at T.L. Taylor's work on that, which discusses the intersectional aspects of game design and how each of those can impact on each other. This can then form the basis of conclusions, and they are often a precursor to further iteration of the game design. As such, research through design can continue as an iterative process, with each test leading to results which form the basis for the following version of the game design. So, for example, you put into practice your theoretical principles, you test it to see if the effect has happened, you then iterate on those results to create a new design. And that can be part of the research through design process, continually iterating on the design based on results that you're having. So in this sense, the iteration becomes part of research through design for the following stages of the process. And this isn't dissimilar to the process of iterative game design, which is used in wider game design strategies, or it can be used in commercial game design, for example. So finally, when all iterations are completed, an assessment is made of the results, an analysis is conducted, and conclusions are drawn. The idea of which is then that you use that to inform your theoretical work that you then bases your conclusions. All of this is made only possible through documentation. No matter what design approach you are choosing, nor the chosen method for examining the results or for analyzing that process, documentation throughout is critical to research through design as a method. Utilization of game design documents and design journals are particularly useful to this process, no matter what approach you're taking. And if you're interested in looking into this more, there is another lecture in the series on game design documents. So the results and iterations can be clearly documented, recorded, and reflected upon using these general processes. But of course, there are also going to be specific methodologies and forms of analysis that require a particular form of documentation. This needs to be considered prior to going through the process, because documentation of your results is the very subject of your work. And that is something that you're going to have to analyze throughout the process of your research through design, especially if you're iterating upon it. So please refer to other lectures if you're interested in how these documenting approaches can work in your own design approaches. The advantage of research through design approach are that it puts into immediate practice clear theoretical principles. It can allow for the validation of those theoretical principles, and it can even be versatile enough to be reactive to unexpected results. So what you're doing is taking a theoretical principle, putting it into immediate practice to see if the effect that you predicted would come out. And if it doesn't, you can record that and even iterate upon it to see if you can change that through different design principles. The drawbacks of research through design can be that it can also be difficult to exactly isolate which elements of a design are leading to the results that are recorded, because of that assemblage of play, that there are lots of intersectional factors in a game design working at all times. It can be very difficult to isolate whether or not that theoretical principle that you put into place is actually having the effect that you need it to. Iterating through the process then lends itself to the opportunity of disengaging with the initial theoretical principles. As you continue to iterate and build on the results that you have, you may actually start getting away from the theoretical work that you were basing your design on in the first place. So as such, it is often useful to triangulate research through design with the other approaches. So looking at research of design and research for design in your approach of research through design can be very useful to determine whether or not your results are from those elements that you put in theoretically, or if there's any way that you've been disengaging from that. And of course, you can do research of design of your design after it's been completed. And research for design may come out of your research through design. You may have theoretical principles that are developed through your design process, which could then lead into other work. So in conclusion, research through design puts into practice a clearly stated theoretical principle or approach. It allows for testing and analyzing of those results and determining whether or not those theoretical principles may have had the effect that you were looking for. It is often best to be conducted with a triangulated approach in order to make sure that that is the case, and must be documented throughout using appropriate methods, but also likely through game design documents and journals. Thank you for listening. I hope this has been useful. My name has been Josephine Baird, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Uppsala. Goodbye.